My body felt as if it were made of glass while I lay on the massage table. Every movement sent an acute jolt of pain, as if tiny shards were piercing my muscles. Boston in December was particularly cruel. The cold seeped into my bones, intensifying the pain that had become my constant companion over the past months. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. "Take a deep breath," said the man with steady hands positioned behind me. "Let's work on the tension points first." Ryan Cooper wasn't like I had imagined. When Sarah, my colleague from the finance department, handed me his card with a knowing smile and the phrase, "He works miracles," I pictured a middle-aged gentleman with a foreign accent and a whiff of menthol oils. Instead, I found a man in his early 30s with short brown hair, broad shoulders, and a smile that seemed genuinely interested in the stories each muscle had to tell. "How long have you worked at Mercer Financial?" he asked, while his fingers found precisely the knot under my right shoulder blade. I let out an involuntary groan. "Sorry," he murmured. "That spot is quite compromised." 7 years, I answered between controlled breaths. "But it feels like an eternity sitting in the same chair." The studio was different from the modern spas downtown. Located on the second floor of an old building in Beacon Hill, it had something intimate and unpretentious. Plants hung from the shelves, the lighting was soft, and a playlist of ambient sounds mixed with piano played quietly. No corporate logos, no miraculous promises on the walls, just a space inviting silence. "You're carrying a lot of tension here," Ryan commented as he pressed the base of my spine. His fingers moved with surgical precision, as if reading a detailed map of every battle my body had fought. "I work in risk analysis." Ironic, isn't it? I assess financial dangers all day, yet I completely ignored my body's signals until I was practically immobilized last week. Waking up on the bathroom floor after a muscle contraction so violent it knocked me down during my morning shower had been the final straw. Sarah noticed my discomfort when she saw me limping to my desk that morning and discreetly slipped his visiting card into my drawer. "Muscles have memory," he explained, moving on to work on my shoulders. "Every stress, every extra hour, every worry, they record it all. Your body is simply asking for attention." As his hands worked their way along me, I felt something unusual happening, like layers of armor I didn't even know I was wearing were beginning to come off. It wasn't only physical relief. It was as if something deeper was being reached. "How did you become a massage therapist?" I asked, trying to distract my mind from the confusing whirl of sensations. "I was a competitive swimmer until I turned 22, he replied, as he applied firm pressure to my trapezius. "A shoulder injury ended my career. During rehab, I discovered the power of therapeutic touch. I decided then that I wanted to offer others what I received at that moment. Not just physical relief, but a bridge to reconnect with one's body." There was something in the way he spoke, directly, without frills, yet deeply present, that made me feel both comfortable and oddly unsettled at the same time. I went back the following week, and the week after that. The sessions became a ritual I eagerly anticipated. My body started responding in ways I never imagined possible. Chronic pain began to ease, my posture improved, and I started sleeping more deeply. On the 4th visit, Ryan suggested working more deeply on the psoas, a muscle he said connected the lumbar spine to the femur and was often called the muscle of the soul because it stored emotional stress. "People who spend the day sitting tend to have this muscle extremely contracted," he explained as I positioned myself. "It's like the body is always prepared to run, but never given permission to." As his hands moved near my pelvis, I felt a vulnerability that I hadn't experienced in years. It was not just physical. It was as if each pressure was disassembling something I had painstakingly constructed. A flawless professional identity. A life that was orderly, predictable. "Jack, you're holding your breath," he observed softly. "Try to relax. I'm only working on the fascia tensions." At that moment, I realized our conversations had evolved. We were no longer discussing only muscle pain. Between sessions, we talked about books, movies, philosophy. We discovered we shared similar tastes in music. He told me about Apollo, his rescued greyhound, and I shared childhood stories from Providence. There was something disarming about how fully Ryan could be present. Unlike the superficial interactions that dominated my day-to-day at the office, every conversation with him felt genuine. Each session was like a small shedding, not just of clothes, but of the protective layers I had built up over the years. During the 7th session, as he worked on a particularly tense spot in my lower back, Ryan hesitated briefly. "I notice there's still a lot of residual tension in the deep muscles of your pelvis and your pelvic diaphragm," he said in a professional tone. "There's a more advanced approach that could significantly help, but it involves more sensitive areas. It's totally therapeutic, of course, but I understand completely if you don't want to explore this option." I felt my heart accelerate. Not because of the words themselves, but because of what was left unsaid between us. Over the last few sessions, I had noticed something changing subtly. The way our conversations would extend after the sessions, how his eyes sometimes lingered a little longer on mine, how I found myself rearranging my schedule to ensure I could keep those sacred Wednesday appointments. "What would this advanced approach be?" I asked, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "Deep myofascial release of the pelvic floor muscles," he explained, keeping his tone clinical. "It can help with posture issues, lower back dysfunction, and even digestive problems. It's a legitimate technique, but I rarely offer it because many clients feel uneasy about the level of closeness involved." A silence followed. The air in the studio seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. "Do you offer this special service to many clients?" I asked, letting a subtle insinuation come through in my voice. Our eyes met in the mirror on the opposite wall. I saw something change in his expression, a trace of vulnerability I had never noticed before. "No," he replied simply. "Very rarely. I want to try it," I decided during the next session, without any preamble. Ryan nodded, his face revealing a mix of professionalism and something more that I couldn't fully decipher. He explained the procedure in detail, the therapeutic benefits, and the muscles involved. His voice maintained the clinical tone, yet there was a new tension in the air. "I'll leave you some time to get ready," he said, stepping out of the room. "Position yourself as in previous sessions, but this time only with the towel." When he returned, his hands seemed different, more tentative, more aware. He started as usual, working my shoulders and then moving down along my spine. But there was a new quality to his touch, as if every movement was a silent question. "I'm going to work on your lower back more deeply now," he warned, his voice a tad lower than normal. "Tell me if you feel any discomfort." As his hands slid toward more intimate areas, I felt my breathing change. It wasn't merely therapeutic anymore. There was an undeniable component of pleasure that I could no longer ignore. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of this confusing mixture of sensations. "Is this helping?" he asked, his voice now near my ear. "Yes," I replied, my voice sounding almost unfamiliar even to myself. It was then that I turned my face, and our eyes met just inches apart. Time seemed to hang suspended. All the pretense of a professional relationship evaporated in that instant. What remained was a truth impossible to ignore. There was something between us that transcended the therapist-client bond. "Jack," he murmured, his face revealing inner conflict. "This isn't usually how it goes with other clients." "Perhaps I'm not merely a client, am I?" I asked, finally voicing what had been simmering in the space between our sessions for weeks. His response came in the form of a touch that no longer felt therapeutic at all. His fingers interlaced with mine, his forehead softly touching mine. "If we continue," he said with seriousness, "I can't be your therapist anymore. Maybe I need you more than I need therapy," I replied, feeling years of certainties and conventions crumble with those words. That treatment room transformed into its own universe that afternoon, a strange territory where the rules that had once guided my life seemed distant and irrelevant. Ryan remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed intently on mine, as if he were weighing the reality of what was unfolding. "I need to be sure," he finally said, his voice controlled yet laden with palpable tension. "I want you to completely understand what you're asking for, Jack." There was a seriousness in his tone that struck me deeply. It wasn't just desire. It was respect, an ethical line he considered carefully before crossing. "I understand," I replied, feeling an unusual clarity. "And I'm perfectly aware." He nodded slowly, and then his lips met mine. It wasn't as I had imagined. It wasn't the frantic urgency characteristic of my few previous encounters with men hidden in the shadows of my carefully compartmentalized life. There was an almost reverent tenderness in his touch, as though he were still practicing his art, but now with an entirely new purpose. His fingers glided along my neck, weaving into my hair as the kiss deepened. In that moment, all the weeks of accumulating tension, all the unspoken words during our sessions, and all the carefully repressed desire erupted in an urgency that consumed us both. The towel that had been covering me fell forgotten to the floor. Ryan stepped away briefly to remove his shirt, revealing a torso sculpted by years of competitive swimming and yoga practice. There was a scar on his right shoulder, probably from the injury he had mentioned, and I found myself tracing it with my fingers, recognizing in that mark the transformation that had led him to this moment. Even to me. "You're handsome," I murmured, surprised by my own boldness. A smile touched his lips. "I've been admiring you for weeks," he confessed, his hands now exploring my body with a freedom I had not seen before. "The way your expression shifts when I find a tension spot. How you gradually relax under my touch. How you laugh when I tell you something about Apollo." I was struck by the intimacy of these observations, details about me that I hadn't even noticed, captured by his keen eyes. It was somehow more disconcerting than the physical intimacy we were now sharing. "I've never done this with a client before," he confessed as he pulled me close. "I want you to know that." "And I've never wanted my therapist this badly," I replied with a slight smile, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. He laughed, but there was a trace of vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm not your therapist anymore, Jack. From now on, I'm just a man who can't stop thinking about you." What followed was a dance of mutual discovery. Ryan applied his anatomical expertise in ways that made me forget completely about the chronic pain that had initially brought me to him. Every touch was precise, intentional, yet now driven by desire rather than by a purely therapeutic aim. The massage table that had once served exclusively for treatment became the epicenter of something transformative. There, amidst the aromas of essential oils and the distant strains of ambient music that had become so familiar, I allowed myself to be fully seen for the first time in years. Not as a financial analyst, not as a competent professional, not as a responsible son or a loyal friend, but simply as a man with desires and vulnerabilities I had long denied. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Beside him, under the Boston night sky, I finally understood what poets had always tried to say about transformation. It wasn't about becoming someone else, but about finally allowing yourself to be who you've always been. In that realization, I found not just relief, but a joy as vast as the ocean beyond the harbor. Deep, mysterious, and ultimately, completely mine. The next 2 months passed in a succession of discoveries. Evenings with Ryan after work, weekend walks with Apollo in the park, nights spent watching documentaries while curled up together on his couch. A new routine that naturally took shape without the calculations and strategies that had characterized my earlier relationships. The sessions with Elaine were helping my body rebalance, while Ryan was guiding my heart to find its true rhythm. But as our relationship deepened, the compartmentalization I had maintained for so long began to feel unsustainable. One March morning, over a quiet breakfast in Ryan's kitchen, the inevitable topic surfaced. "The annual Mercer Financial Party is this Saturday," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "A pompous event at the Four Seasons. Open bar, a live orchestra, and endless speeches extolling our achievements." Ryan looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "Sounds nice," he replied with a gentle smile. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the next question. "Would you like to go with me?" His face registered a momentary surprise followed by something deeper, an understanding. I immediately realized that he grasped the real meaning of the invitation. It wasn't just about a social event. It was about crossing that final barrier, the division between my newly discovered personal life and the carefully constructed professional identity. "Are you sure?" he asked simply. I had given it plenty of thought over the past weeks. The contrast between the freedom I felt with Ryan and the constant vigilance I maintained at work was growing ever more exhausting. Casual questions from colleagues about my personal life, once easily brushed aside, now weighed like outright falsehoods. "I'm tired of living half a life," I finally replied, "and I refuse to hide you as if you were some shameful secret." Ryan reached across the table and held my hand. "This isn't a small decision, Jack. It could affect your career. Or it might not affect it at all," I argued. "It's 2025, not the 90s. Mercer has diversity policies and there are openly LGBTQ+ employees in several departments. But none at the highest levels where you are," Ryan observed pointedly. He was right, and that bothered me deeply. Despite all the corporate rhetoric on inclusion, the upper echelons remained surprisingly homogeneous. Martin Hayes, who had been CEO for 15 years, was known for his traditional values, even if he publicly endorsed diversity initiatives. "Another reason to change things," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Besides, I've been topping performance reviews for 5 years in a row. My risk analysis reports saved the company millions last quarter." Ryan squeezed my hand gently. "I'm not questioning your professional value. I just want to be sure you're ready for the possible consequences." His genuine concern touched me deeply. Ryan never tried to push me in any direction. He always respected my process and my pace. Yet I also knew he deserved more than to be treated as just another compartment of my life. "I'll never be completely ready," I admitted. "But I know I don't want to live only half a life anymore." The smile that lit up his face made every potential risk seem worth it. "In that case, I guess I'll have to buy a new suit." In the days leading up to the event, I experienced a turbulent blend of anxiety and relief. Every possible scenario played out in my mind, from polite surprise to veiled comments that might haunt my career for years. But beneath the anxiety grew a steadily increasing sense of integrity. For the first time, every aspect of my life was on the verge of aligning. On the night of the event, Ryan arrived at my apartment wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. His hair was neatly styled, and I noticed he had trimmed the 3-day stubble he normally kept. "You look absolutely amazing," I said, feeling a pride that went far beyond any anxiety. "You don't look too bad yourself," he replied, adjusting my burgundy tie. "Ready for this?" "Not entirely," I said with a nervous smile. "Let's do this." The ballroom at the Four Seasons was decorated with understated elegance. Minimal floral arrangements, strategic lighting, and the Mercer Financial logo subtly projected on one wall. Dozens of colleagues mingled with champagne flutes in hand, engaged in conversations that fused business talk with idle small talk. Our entrance didn't cause the immediate buzz I had imagined. A few curious glances were thrown our way, perhaps more because I rarely brought someone to corporate events than because of Ryan's identity. I accepted 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter and offered one to him. "Less dramatic than I expected," I whispered. "Still early in the night," he replied with a reassuring smile. "But I'm here, regardless of what happens." His steady presence beside me anchored me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We began circulating around the room, and I casually introduced Ryan to my colleagues. His natural ease in social settings, shaped by years of dealing with diverse clients, made the introduction simple. Soon, I was deep in an animated conversation with 2 junior analysts about the best running trails in Boston. "Anderson, I finally found you," a familiar voice called out. Turning around, I saw Martin Hayes, the CEO of Mercer Financial, approaching with his wife, Patricia, an elegant woman who ran an arts foundation. Hayes embodied every aspect of a finance executive: meticulously trimmed gray hair, impeccable posture, and a firm handshake that exuded authority. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," I greeted him, my throat suddenly dry. "Allow me to introduce Ryan Cooper." Hayes extended his hand automatically. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Cooper. Do you work in finance too?" "Not exactly," Ryan answered with a polite smile. "I'm a massage therapist and a physical rehabilitation specialist." Hayes looked momentarily perplexed, as if trying to slot this information into a familiar category. "Fascinating. And how did you two meet?" I sensed that this was the critical moment, the one that might define the rest of the evening, and perhaps even my career at Mercer. "Ryan was my therapist when I developed back problems from long hours at the office," I explained, meeting Hayes' eyes, "and now we've been together for a few months." There was a pause as Hayes processed this new information. His wife was the first to react. How wonderful, Patricia said with a genuine smile. Martin suffers terribly from back pain as well. Perhaps we could schedule a session? That comment broke the momentary tension. Hayes let out a brief laugh. Patricia says I sit too much. She says my spine is turning into a question mark. Ryan naturally slipped back into his professional role. It's a common issue among executives. The human body wasn't designed to sit for 8 hours a day. The conversation drifted to safer topics: health practices, the importance of regular exercise, and how Mercer might implement more effective wellness programs. Hayes seemed genuinely interested in Ryan's ergonomic insights. When they moved away to greet other guests, I exchanged a look with Ryan. That was surprisingly calm, I murmured, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to fade. He appeared more interested in my professional expertise than in our relationship, Ryan observed. Maybe people care less than you feared. The night passed with a natural ease that surprised me. There were a few curious glances, certainly a few discreet whispers, but nothing like the drama I had anticipated. Ryan was entirely at ease, talking about everything from the latest exhibit at the MFA to the challenges of Boston's real estate market. During dinner, we were placed at a table with Sarah, the colleague who had originally recommended Ryan, and her husband, along with 2 senior directors and their wives. Sarah shot me a knowing smile as we sat down. So, therapy really worked, huh? She commented quietly while the others were distracted by the menu. More than I ever imagined, I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her role in this journey. I'm really happy for you, Jack, she said sincerely. You seem lighter somehow. Her observation resonated deeply, capturing exactly how I felt, as if an invisible weight I had borne for decades had finally been lifted. As the evening progressed and the orchestra began to play, Ryan surprised me by leaning in closer. Dance with me? I glanced over at the small dance floor where a few couples were swaying to a classic jazz tune. Are you sure about this? If you are, he replied simply. That was the final line to cross that night, the most visible, the most undeniable. I took his hand and led him onto the dance floor. We moved together with natural ease, my hand resting on his back, our fingers interlaced. I felt eyes on us, but for the first time, I didn't care. There was an extraordinary freedom in simply being fully present, without divisions or reservations. I remember this moment, Ryan murmured as we danced. The first time I touched your waist during our early sessions, you were so tense, you appeared carved in stone. I smiled at the memory. And now? Now you flow like water, he replied, his eyes sparkling under the gentle lights. On the subway heading toward the financial district, my mind raced through every possible scenario, from total normality to a palpable tension. Ryan had sent me a message early that morning. Take a deep breath. Be who you are. Everything else will fall into place. The first sign that something was different came when I stepped into the elevator and encountered Diane, the operations director who had attended the event. Instead of the usual comments about the weather or a pending report, she smiled and said, Your boyfriend is extremely articulate, Jack. Martin mentioned that his ideas about corporate wellness programs were quite innovative. Thank you, I replied, momentarily surprised by her casual tone. Ryan has such a unique perspective on workplace health. When the elevator doors opened on my floor, Diane added, By the way, Patricia Hayes already scheduled an appointment with him. Looks like you inadvertently opened up a new market niche for your partner. The day passed with a mix of normality and small surprises. Some colleagues behaved exactly as always. Others asked casually curious questions about Ryan, and a few maintained a subtle distance that hadn't been there before. At the end of the afternoon, Sarah stopped by my desk with a cup of coffee. Survived the first day after the revelation? She asked with a smile. Surprisingly, yes, I replied. Less drama than I expected. People are usually more caught up in their own lives than in others, she observed wisely. Besides, you impressed Hayes with your latest reports. I heard your name is being considered to lead the new climate risk analysis division. That news caught me completely off guard. Really? I thought Richard Davis was the favorite for that role. Sarah shrugged. Apparently, Hayes was impressed with your authenticity, in his words. He said the company needs leaders who are transparent and true to themselves. She smiled. Ironic, isn't it? That evening, while I was sharing the news with Ryan over dinner at my apartment, he didn't seem as surprised as I had expected. Makes sense, he commented as he poured another glass of wine for us. People who hide such a big part of themselves waste so much energy keeping those divisions up. When you tear down those walls, that energy becomes available for creativity, problem-solving, and authentic leadership. Now you're speaking as a therapist? I teased lightly. Speaking as someone who has observed your transformation over the past months, he replied seriously. You're different, Jack. More present, more confident. And of course, it shows in your performance at work. In the weeks that followed, the prospect of a promotion became an official reality. I was called into Hayes's office to discuss leading the new division focused on climate risk analysis for investments, a pioneering area that represented the future of the company. We need someone who thinks outside the box for this role, Hayes explained. Someone unafraid to challenge established conventions. That comment carried a subtext that did not go unnoticed. I accepted the new position with a renewed sense of purpose. The work was challenging. Analyzing how climate change would affect long-term investment portfolios required a multidisciplinary approach that went beyond traditional financial models. Meanwhile, Ryan was experiencing his own professional success. The unexpected connection with the corporate world through the Mercer event had opened new doors. He began developing a specialized occupational health program for executives, combining therapeutic massage with body awareness training and stress management. It's like our professional lives are converging in unexpected ways, he remarked one evening as we strolled with Apollo along the Charles River. You bringing a sense of social consciousness to finance, and me bringing bodily wellness into the corporate atmosphere. Our relationship deepened with each passing month. In July, when the lease on my apartment was about to expire, the question arose naturally. Would it be crazy to consider living together? I asked while we prepared dinner in Ryan's kitchen. I end up spending more time here than in my own apartment. Ryan paused at the cutting board and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Apollo and I have been talking about this for weeks, he replied with a smile. He's especially taken with your leather sofa, so that means it's a yes? Instead of answering verbally, Ryan moved closer, cupping my face in his hands and kissing me deeply. It's an absolute yes, he said. The process of merging our lives went surprisingly smoothly. My minimalist furniture blended nicely with the warmer aesthetic of Ryan's apartment. Books shared shelves, and our clothes found common space in the closet. Apollo seemed especially pleased with the change, mostly because it meant more walks and a constant attention from both of us. In September, 6 months after the corporate event that marked my final outing of the closet, Ryan and I were sitting on the apartment deck watching the sunset over the harbor. Apollo dozed lazily at our feet, occasionally releasing a contented sigh in his canine dreams. Sometimes I still catch myself expecting something to go wrong, I admitted, holding Ryan's hand, as if all this were too good to be true. Ryan interlaced his fingers with mine. That happens when you spend too long believing you don't deserve complete happiness. It takes time for the heart to trust that it really can feel joy. His words led me to reflect on the journey of the past 9 months. I had gone from a man divided, living a compartmentalized life, to someone who was finally integrated. The back pain that initially drove me to see Ryan had long since disappeared. But I sometimes wondered if it hadn't been a disguised gift, a physical sign that something in my life needed urgent realignment. You know what's funny? I said as we watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. For years I thought I was protecting my career, my professional reputation. But ever since I stopped hiding who I am, everything has improved. Not just my personal life, but my career too. Ryan smiled. Maybe because now all your energy is available for what truly matters, instead of being wasted keeping walls up between different parts of you. A boat drifted slowly past the harbor, its lights reflected on the dark water. Apollo lifted his head briefly, then decided he wasn't interested and went back to sleep. Next week's my birthday, Ryan mentioned casually. Guess what? I've already planned something, I replied with a smile. I booked that cabin in the Berkshires you mentioned. 3 days, just the two of us and Apollo. Hiking, a bonfire, that old tub on the deck. Ryan looked at me with that familiar expression. a mix of surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that still took my breath away. "Sounds perfect," he replied softly. As the sky filled completely with stars over the Boston harbor, I felt a calm certainty settle within me. The road to reach this moment hadn't been straightforward or easy. There had been both physical and emotional pain. There were fears to face, defenses to shed, truths to acknowledge. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. But for the first time, I felt completely at home. Not just in the apartment we now shared, but in my own body, in my own life. Ryan's skillful hands had started as a therapeutic intervention for my physical pain, but they had ultimately guided me toward a kind of healing I never realized I needed. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Beside him, under the Boston night sky, I finally understood what poets had always tried to say about transformation. It wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about finally allowing yourself to be who you've always been. And in that realization, I found not only relief, but a joy that stretched as vast as the ocean beyond the harbor. Deep, mysterious, and ultimately, completely mine.